this day by introducing to Linux, doing some introduction. Okay. So I'll be your host for today. My name is Mayam Nizel, as you all know. And we're gonna use this reference, which is from the Linux Professional Institute. It's called Linux. I think I need to share this. Let me share it. Well, I'm gonna share my entire screen. I think it's much more efficient. So stop sharing. Let us share my entire. Am I like recording? Yes. Okay. So I'll share my entire screen. So this is the book we're gonna start off with. It's from the Linux Professional Institute. It's about Linux essentials, and we're gonna take a lot from this book. It's really helpful, and it like covers almost everything. Okay. Okay, so what are we gonna cover in day one? We're gonna cover the definition of Linux. What is Linux? We're gonna talk a little bit about the history of Linux and who created it. We're also gonna discuss a few core concepts like the operating system and kernel and what's the difference between them. What is open source, and we're gonna check out the source code for Linux, which is connected to the open source stuff, and we're gonna check out the distributions and use cases. So, definition. What is Linux? It's a powerful open source operating system. It's also based on a Unix architecture and it's a fundamental component of computing environments. And we're going to talk about what does operating system mean and what does open source mean, and based on Unix architecture and how it is one of the fundamental components in the use cases. Okay, so history, how it was created. So this guy is the brains behind the creation of Linux and also Git. Git is built on Linux. So his name is Linus Torvalds, and he created Linux in 1991 as a university personal project. So Linux was inspired by Unix, but it doesn't contain any Unix code. So Unix is an operating system. It's much older than Linux. And Linux was inspired by Unix, but it doesn't contain any kind of Unix code. Also, one of the use cases of Unix and one of the most popular operating systems that we use now in Samsung phones and in smart TVs is Android. Android is based on a modified version of the Linux kernel with or plus some open source software. So Android also uses Linux. Okay. Now we're gonna discuss more about the core concepts, and we're gonna check out the source code and a few distributions that has Linux in them. So as we can see from the photo, if anyone can tell me, what can you conclude from this photo? Like you see an operating system, you see kernel, you see Linux is in the kernel circle. So what can you conclude from this photo? If you want to talk, you can talk. I can't see any raised hands. Okay, Zaid. Here.
My conclusion would be that Linux is based on an older version, or let's say a kernel named Unix.
Yes.
Okay, and then it was named to, I believe, Geno.
You mean the okay? What's a GNU?
It was like the original operating system, but Linux is just a code. So the name is GNU Linux. Okay,
Yes,
but we call it in short Linux. So Linux
kind of.
is like the core of the operating system, GNOME.
You mean GNOME? It's GNOME.
I actually forgot the exact name, but
Yeah,
I can recall it was something like that, GNO or GEMO.
Yeah, your voice kind of went. So there's this thing called GNOME Linux. You mean this thing? GNU. If you mean that, it's kind of true, yeah. But also we can see that the core component
Yes,
of
exactly.
Linux.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, it's true
GNU
actually.
Linux, yes.
GNU Linux, yes. It's true what you have said. And we also can see that the kernel is a subset of the operating system. So operating system contains the kernel, and the core component of Linux is the kernel. So most of today's application uses the Linux kernel. Okay. So what's the difference between them? Like, okay, kernel operating system, we know operating system is more broad and it's bigger than the kernel. And what's the difference? What the functionality is for the both of them? So you see here, the operating system is kind of a confused guy. He's like, uh, what should I do? And you kind of see the kernel here, he's like a crazy person who's kind of shy because maybe he has less responsibility than operating system, so it's true. An operating system in general, it means it is the software that manages the hardware and the software, and it also acts as an intermediary between the user and the software. So in Arabic, هو عبارة عن software بيعمل handling للهاردوير والسوفتوير تاع الجهاز، ونفس الإشي بيعمل لنا بيكون زي وسيط ما بين اليوزر والجهاز. هذا هو الاوبريتنج سيستم. ومن انواع الاوبريتنج سيستم في عندنا لينكس، في عندنا ويندوز، في عندنا بتاع الماك، نسيت اسمه، ماك اوبريتنج سيستم. و those are like the most popular, I guess. Linux والويندوز والماك, those are the most known or well-known operating systems. So kernel, they have less responsibility. It's also the core component of Linux, as we said. It manages system resources like CPU, memory, and devices. So it only handles internal stuff. It doesn't handle any kind of external stuff like users. But he's kind of crazy. Like, look at his hair. That guy is struggling. Both of them are struggling. Okay. So we said that Linux is an open source software. What does open source mean? So when we say open source, we mean that there's a whole community behind it, or it's free for you to see as a viewer. It's also possible to modify the Linux code and to create your own flavors of Linux, or what's called your own distribution of Linux. So open source means that you can view the code, you can modify it, and then you can distribute your own distribution or your own flavor based on the modification you have done. So also open source means that there is a developer community behind it that contributes in its development. Like there's many open source softwares. So let's say open source softwares example. So we can see Mozilla Firefox, Linux, GNU, the one we talked about, even Python, Apache. Apache are one of the most famous open source softwares, and we're gonna see how to install an Apache server on Linux. We can see that PHP also is a backend programming language, and WordPress also for web development stuff. Okay. So if we want to see the source code of Linux, we can type Linux source code, and it's gonna open this GitHub repository. It's a place where we have all the code that we need in GitHub. So there's documentation. If we went and deep dive into these, we can use this get clone to clone it onto our own devices, but we're not going to do that because it's going to take a lot of gigabytes of memory. So we're going to see these kind of files. That is architecture, block, cryptographic keys, initialization code, file system code, driver codes, like graphical processors, GPUs, and network device drivers. The kernel, the memory management code, the network code, the documentation tools, and the include code. So here we see the arc, which means the architecture of the device, the block device, the block file, which means that it means the SSD and hard drives, certs, certificates, cryptographic API keys, drivers, file system, include initialization code, kernel, libraries, management, memory management. Network configuration, Rust, security tools, users, and a lot of things. Like you can open anything you want. We can open the documentation and we can see anything we want. So if we open the documentation for the architecture and we opened any kind of thing we want, like device mapper maybe, and anything we want, like maybe just cache policies. So you're gonna see the full documentation behind the cache policies and for writing policies and everything you need. So it's available, the Linux code, it's available for everyone. And you can see how many contributors, if we went again to the GitHub file, you can see how many contributors are there. So it's really an open source system. And you can see that there is a big portion of C, a small portion of Python, assembly, and shell script. Or yeah. Okay. Okay. So one of the most Linux distributions we know right now is Ubuntu, Fedora, Red Hat, Debian, SUSE, Arc. There's also a lot more than these six. There's CentOS and there's Kali Linux. There's a lot of distributions. Like if we just opened Linux distributions, we can see like there's a lot of distributions. As you see here, there's ParrotOS, BlackArc, Arc, Peppermint, 42 more, like Ubuntu. There's a lot of Ubuntu distributions. You can create your own distributions. I'm gonna create my own distributions and call it Maya Linux or My Linux. I'm joking. I don't think I'm gonna be capable of doing that yet. Okay, so let's check a few use cases. Why do we need Linux and why are we using Linux? Like, okay, we know all that. We know Linux is a powerful tool. It's an open source tool. You can modify and create your own distribution, but what are the use cases? Why do we need it? Okay, so sorry. The first use case, which is the most used case for Linux, is servers. You can install Apache as a web server. You can use it as a database server, a mail server, and a file server. It's already a file system, so you can use it as a file server. Also, Linux is great for development. So you can do game development, DevOps, development and operation, and some data analytics. You can run batch jobs on Linux. You can do this on the cloud, actually. I think Zaid, he said he's a data analyst. So Zaid, if you can tell us, data does not come clean. Like when you want to check the stuff or you want to clean the data, you have a lot to clean, then you need to clean it, and you need to make it very tidy. Then you need to do the analysis. And today's data come in huge chunks. It's called big data. It's called the big data for a reason, because everything around this data, like social media, likes, comments, stuff. So we need a lot of computers that do this type of stuff. Yes, Omar.
بدي اسال ايش تفرق الديستريبيوشنز، يعني الكالي لينكس ايش تفرق عن الاوبونتو هدول، ايش كل واحده لها استخدام ولا شو؟
Yes, exactly. So Kali Linux is if you're a cybersecurity student, are you a cybersecurity student?
لا I'm computer science student.
Okay, so if you're a cybersecurity student or you're into penetration testing or the security stuff, Kali Linux comes in pre-installed cyber softwares, you know. So in normal Linux, if you want to use cyber-related software, you have to download it, like Wireshark, let's say for an example, or Nmap to nmap the open ports of a system. So anything, so let's say Kali Linux is for cybersecurity. It has pre-installed the libraries that in normal cases you have to install, you know. Let's say, for example, Red Hat is more for an enterprise solution. You don't use it as a user, you use it for like, I don't know if you know that Red Hat has a data warehouse that's called Redshift and OpenShift. So there's multiple solutions that Red Hat gives you for enterprises. So Red Hat Linux is more for enterprises and stuff. Ubuntu is kind of like the norm. Anyone can use Ubuntu. It's the most. It's not. I don't know if it's the most common Linux distribution, but for me personally, I use it. Some people use CentOS. They say it's much easier than Ubuntu, but yeah, kind of every distribution has its own flavor, has its own business case, and all of that kind of stuff. Some are paid and some are free. Like Ubuntu is free. Sometimes Red Hat Linux is not free, you have to pay for it. So some are free and some you have to pay for it. And it also depends on the modification percentage and modification stuff that you have did. Is there any kind of question about anything else?
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay. So also we can see that Linux is into embedded systems. Embedded system, if you take computer architecture, you're going to understand what's embedded system, or you take assembly code. These kind of system that has code running in them, like IoT devices, smart TVs, routers, these kind of stuff use this code inside of them. So it's called an embedded system, and you can use Linux for them. For example, a smart TV like Samsung smart TVs contains Android systems, and Android is a modified version of Linux, as we said. Okay. Also, supercomputers, and this is a very nice, like a hint to know, like all top 500 HPCs, which is a high performance computer, run on some variant of Linux. So all the top 500 HPCs or supercomputers run on some variant of Linux. Also, if you're an electrical engineer or you're interested in IoT stuff, you're gonna learn about Raspberry and Raspberry Pi. They're like these. Okay, I wanna like show you a Raspberry Pi. I'm sorry, Raspberry Pi. It's kind of like a chip that you program to do. And people, or electrical engineers do this kind of stuff. Like you can code on this chip, like when you clap, it can turn on and off the light. So this is Raspberry Pi. You can you can use Linux to program this. Also, as we said, Kali Linux is used for network and security. It's used in routers such as embedded system, firewalls, and penetration testing. So let's talk a little bit about Linux in cloud. It's usually offered as infrastructure as a service. So if you have Linux in cloud, you're going to have it as a virtual machine. and you're gonna be responsible for the entire thing except the physical security and infrastructure. So you have the full control over the virtualized virtual machine or the virtualized infrastructure. You can do whatever you want on the cloud, especially if you have a virtual machine, you kind of have the ability to customize it as much as you need. Okay, I think these are exercises if you want to do, but there's this thing, I still haven't fixed it, that's the problem. So it's two questions because the second and the third, they're kind of the same. Okay. So the first exercise, if you want to do a little bit more digging about the distributions, you can consider cost and performance. Which distributions are mostly suitable for businesses that aim to reduce licensing costs while keeping performance at its highest? And you can explain why. So this exercise can give you the ability to dig out and deep dive into the distributions and understand what's the difference between all of them. And what are the major advantages of Raspberry Pi and which functions can they take in businesses? This is also can give you a deeper understanding of Raspberry Pis and these chips and why we program them and how can we use it in IoT in business. Okay, so a Q&A session. I'd like to ask if there's any distribution that caught your attention and why. Do you have any kind of distribution that you felt like you're more into it? I'd say out of my experience, I like to use Ubuntu Linux. It's kind of more easier than the rest. Or Kali Linux, I have used Kali, but I don't like security stuff, so I could say that.
I would say that Arc, like, I was interested in it, but it's for professionals. But the thing that I found interesting about Arc is that it's so customizable. Like, you can do crazy stuff. You can change the whole OS to fit you.
Actually, it's kind of crazy what you can do in Linux. It's a hidden thing, and I think we're gonna learn this type of stuff when we advance a little bit more in this course. You can see like you can do a lot of stuff when we like get deep into the practical part of the course. But Arc is a nice choice. Like that was interesting. Maybe you give me an interest like to look into Arc and stuff.
Yes, you can actually look at it on Reddit communities for Linux. The people there share their customizations, and actually it's some really insane stuff. What can people do with Arc?
Yeah. And the good thing that Linux is open source, so you can see the documentation, you can read about them. I know we hate to read these long and very crammed words, but they're really important somehow in some way. Ahmed, I think you wanted to say something because you opened the mic.
أنا بحكي خلينا على أوبنتو أحسن.
Kind of. Yeah, I think so. I'd agree. I like Ubuntu. It's much more easier.
هو الفكرة أنا جربت جارودة لينكس. هذا ديستريبيوشن أسهل للديفلوبرز. بس الفكرة ما في كتير مصادر، يعني خلينا نحكي على اليوتيوب، مش دائما واحد بحب يقرأ كتب. فشفت أوبنتو أسهل، ويعني حرفيا كمية المصادر في اليوتيوب والفيديوهات لكل إشي، كيف تحمل VS Code، كيف تحمل VLS، حتى كل إشي موجود.
Yeah, plus the GUI is kind of easy. The graphical interface is good. Okay. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for checking the meeting of day one. I want to say something before we go. Let me say this. Okay, so I stopped the recording.